Well, the fun thing about this whole project, this post office project, pretty much, is people realize they've gone here their whole life to this post office, stood in line inside these beautiful hallways in here, looking up at these murals, which many people think are sort of washed out, right? And but they stood there and they felt that this must be Beverly Hills. You know, it's really nice and elegant, but they don't understand what it came to be, how this happened. And the funny thing is, before 1920. The post office was in a grocery store, Mr. Brazzo's grocery store, and people would go in there and buy 15-cent first-class stamp, you know, understand, and it was like a tiny little community. And this lasted for quite a while until about 1920. In 1920, Beverly Hills was already a thriving city, and it was embarrassing to have their post office in a grocery store. It's like being in, you know, the general store. So they decided they'd move it to another location. They moved it to Little Santa Monica Boulevard at one time. That site was small, too small as usual, because the city's growing. A few years later, they moved it to Camden Drive. But you have to understand, they were being moved into a little office spaces, little storefronts, kind of, and it was still not a proper thing, especially for a growing city like Beverly Hills. And it wasn't until during this time that Will Rogers, who was the honorary mayor of Beverly Hills, noticed this, of course. I'm sure it was brought to his attention that the city, to be recognized as a real city, should have a real post office, not some little tiny general store branch. And we're talking 1920s. I mean, this is quite embarrassing. So, of course, there was a committee from the Chamber of Commerce that did go to Washington, and we're having discussions there with raising the money, getting a piece of land, bringing a real post office to Beverly Hills. But it was already, you can understand the feeling that we really don't want to give money to the city of Beverly Hills. They were cost conscious in Washington at the time. And the committee met to no avail, except they were promised $85,000. That's to acquire land and build a building, and it was not enough. You'd end up with another general store. So they enlisted Will Rogers to go to Washington and meet there with the head of the Treasury Department and all these different people and try to convince them that they needed to give us more money here in Beverly Hills. Well, thanks to Will Rogers, he managed to get $300,000 to build a proper building. And they did indeed. You realize we're talking 1925, say, all the way to 1933. All this was going on. 1927 is really when formal plans, more or less, were announced to get money and to do this. But nothing happened until 1933 when the building opened. So it's quite a number of years in the works. So to get this building took a lot of hard work, a lot of people, a lot of cajoling, a lot of political maneuvering. And finally, of course, thanks to Will Rogers, it was open.
You know, I look forward to it being a real community asset. It always has been. I just can't imagine it being anything less than that. We're sitting here looking at these beautiful old photographs that Bob Anderson provided this morning, and you look at the history and the feeling about this from a community standpoint, and you can't see it being anything less than a wonderful community asset.
Well, originally this site was planned to be a theater complex. It was occupied by the Sun Lumber Company. And in the late 20s, they started formulating an idea to build a civic center. And my grandfather, Stanley Anderson, with a group of businessmen here in Beverly Hills, formulated a project here that encompassed the City Hall and where the post office is now. Renderings were done back in the late 20s, early 30s, and there were railroad tracks that ran along Santa Monica Boulevard here, and then over here there was the downtown Beverly Hills, where the people would take the trolley car to here, and then subsequently, before this time, they would take it up to the Beverly Hills Hotel, the Tunerville trolley.
One of my responsibilities as library director was cultural affairs for the City of Beverly Hills, so I'm thrilled to see this opportunity evolve because I think it's finally going to put the missing piece into the picture, as Vikki Reynolds said during her remarks earlier, the cultural piece. So I think it's a wonderful occasion and an opportunity for the city.
You know, we define ourselves as a community that wants to have experiences in music and theater and art, and we have very few venues to make that happen. So hopefully this will not just be a visitors and convention bureau, but it'll be a cultural center as well. And I'm sure that's what everybody wants, and I think it will happen. it's an interesting idea. When this was built, we gave it to the federal government for $1. I thought we should have gotten it back for $1, but in any case, it's worth it. And I think we'll look in this years ahead as a moment of great pride. They were able to make it happen.
City of Beverly Hills gave the United States Post Office this property for $1. And the one mistake that the attorneys made when they gave the government the property, all they had to do was put in one sentence and state that if and when the government ceased using the property for the post office, it would revert back to the city for the same buck. We spent 2 years just trying to get them down. They had appraisals for $8, $9, $10 million. And the thing is, all the land around the post office is owned by the city. So it was a terrible time negotiating with the government. But anyhow, the deal is done, and it is a wonderful piece of property and absolutely the best possibility for doing noble stuff for the city of Beverly Hills.
What we've been doing in reference to the post office, the council put out what is called a request for proposal. We advertised nationwide, coast to coast, and we received various proposals from 6 groups. Some were centered on the East Coast, some were centered here, some were made up of individuals throughout the United States. Most of the proposals did center on using the post office as a cultural center, as a visitor center, and with a theater component. The city commissions, obviously, we would want input from our architectural commission and planning commission. The next step, though, is really to start negotiating with a group who will ultimately lease the building from us and develop it under guidelines that the city will set. Of utmost importance will be the ability of whatever group it is to financially undertake the necessary commitment to raise money to do the necessary repairs and development. And we have some very strong groups in the running. Community access will be guaranteed because that will be part of the lease conditions under which the city would lease to a given group. And they would be committed to do developments along the lines outlined by a city concept for the benefit of all the members of our community. It would be a breach of the lease if they were not to do that, and we basically would take the facility back and start the process over again.
We are dealing with basically a very special facility to begin with, something that couldn't be duplicated today. So when you're dealing with something like that, and you are working with architects and designers who are familiar with restoration and cultural venues, I think that something wonderful will come out of it. One of the things that we lack in the business triangle is a kind of a nightlife opportunity for the retailers. And after 6 o'clock during the normal year, most of the shops are closed. I believe that for the shops and especially for the restaurants in the area, if we do have a facility here that is operating during the evening hours, it would be a great boom to them.
Well, you know, the vision of the council has been a long-term vision for the city. When the Civic Center was built, we lost the auditorium in the cost cutbacks. So there's always been the feeling how wonderful it would be to have a theater, to have chamber music, to have children's theater, to have film series, to be able to deal with celebrities and cultural figures in our city and to do retrospectives of their work. So those were some of the things we were thinking about in a theater which might be somewhere between 450 and 500 seats. Also, it would give opportunities for our school children to see live theater and to be part of performances. We see it as a real asset to the city for young people, old people, for everyone, families. And then looking at this beautiful Great Hall, of course, it looks like an exhibition area to us, an area where we would have civic receptions and perhaps changing exhibitions, perhaps memorabilia of the city, perhaps other art or cultural exhibitions. And we hope to have a city store, not a postcard and t-shirt store, but a store where people can buy historic books and perhaps other material that really speak to the history and to the future of our city and of course to whatever performances would be going on. And then we think about a little cafe where people can gather, and that's really what I was speaking about when it was my turn to speak in the ceremony, that the heart and soul of a city is where we gather. It's where we come together to talk to each other and to share ideas and to share our families and to greet our friends. And so that would be my vision too, that this would be a place where we would be together and that it would be part of the heart and soul of the future of our city. So I think we're going to want to see local people with fundraising capability working with experienced program planners and developers. That, my guess will be, we will have a combination of talented people working on this process as well as a lot of citizen input.
We're going to make the determination what's the best thing for the community, for their use. Is it a cultural center? Is it a theater? Is it a general store, a post office, city store? Is it a tourist center? When we make that determination, then we're going to find the right organization or organizations that could put the puzzle together to refurbish and build this wonderful facility to something the entire community can use and something that will have international appeal.
Well, this is really has been an example of what commitment means, which is to never give up. When I was mayor in 1996, there was a constant stream of rejections from the Postal Service. And yet Vicki was diligent, she was dedicated, and she kept on pushing the council to say, this is an asset that we must acquire. We have to work with the post office, and she was so dedicated and committed to that function that we've ended up with this beautiful building today. And it's difficult to describe the number of rejections that she got and yet never gave up. And there's really a good lesson in that for the whole community, that when you want something and you feel so passionate about something, you can end up with it. You just have to work hard enough, be creative enough, and she was very creative and imaginative as to how the city was eventually able to acquire this beautiful facility. We've talked to a great number of people in the community, and right now the council is evaluating 6 proposals for a performing arts center, for people and places that would have perhaps some type of IMAX technology through here to present visions of the city of Beverly Hills. We're not quite sure, other than the fundamental notion that it should be available for all the people in Beverly Hills. It should be a real resource for the community, something that we can be proud of for the next 50 years.
How will the old post office tie in with the city hall? Because you've got a loading ramp over here now. What do you envision in between?
Oh, I can tell you what I'd like, which may not be what anyone else likes. That if we could give some consideration to closing down part of Crescent, which may never happen because of the traffic patterns, then you could really tie in City Hall with this beautiful edifice. And you could have another park, you'd have loads of green space where we could have a sculpture garden and discussions, and from my standpoint, that would be real beneficial to the city.
Well, this is the culmination of all the work to acquire the property from the U.S. Postal Service, which has taken us 5 years. But it's, you know, as I said in my remarks earlier today, that this is not only a wonderful completion to our Civic Center and a wonderful piece of real estate, but this is going to be the home, we hope, of the cultural piece for our community. We hope to see here a wonderful cultural visitor center where people can come together and enjoy theater and dance and recitals, where we can have community meetings, where we could have corporate meetings, where we'll have art exhibitions, where we'll have a wonderful visitor center for our visitors and our guests to come and learn about all the things that Beverly Hills has to offer and share with them the excitement of the region and things that there are to see and do around the area. And we think that program has tremendous potential, and so that's why we think we had the support of so many people, the endorsement of Senator Dianne Feinstein, and ultimately we're able to persuade the Postal Service to sell us the building. Well, if you look at the city plan and the way it's juxtaposed against City Hall, if you go into the back of the post office and you go into the freight elevator, one of my favorite things to do is to push a button, up go the loading dock gates, and right across the street, is Beverly Hills City Hall, and it's really quite spectacular. The buildings really do go together, work together, and complement each other. It's a wonderful synergy. The money that was donated privately to a foundation which is called the Beverly Hills Cultural Foundation, and that was formed in order to have a feasibility study. They needed to have paid for not by the city, so that the hotels and actually Max Salter was the only individual, some banks put a nominal amount, put $5,000 into an account, and $40,000 was spent for a feasibility study to see if the building in fact could hold this program of a theater, a visitor center, and using the exhibition hall for changing exhibitions.
Back in the beginning, Max was involved, as far as I think, with you in starting out the process. What was his involvement?
Well, Max was the mayor, and I was the vice mayor when I came to the city council and said, you know, that post office is for sale, and there's some talk about turning it into the Y, but I think we should buy it and use it as a cultural center. And so Max was very encouraging, although he was very in favor of having a Y. We really decided at that point that an athletics facility would be better in a standalone building and not in a historic structure.
Actually, you might be in the right place at the right time as mayor, as the rotation goes, to do the first openings here.
Well, it would be exciting. That's very optimistic, but I'd love to. I've had optimistic dreams for a long time, and dreams come true, so here's hoping.
Right.
This building is an Italian Renaissance building. It has Italian quarry marble panels. It has alfresco murals by Charles Kessler. It is really a spectacular building. It's a work of art and a real treasure, and I know that the city will take very good care of it, and it'll be something we'll all really enjoy and cherish. Vikki Reynolds was phenomenal in the way that she tapped in to many people who could be very helpful to opening doors for us. And likewise, we try to consult with the City of Beverly Hills, letting them know what the goals of the Postal Service were, how to approach this, who to contact. And so we really worked collaboratively. And when I said in the award that I presented to the city and the Postal Service that there is strength and unity in that cooperation, that is really true. Because if we were not united, we would not have achieved this. And it is that strength that made it possible to be here today and to celebrate the commemoration.
Okay.